Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's panel on music education, diversity and inclusivity. I'm Joanna Bullivant, lecturer in the Faculty of Music at Oxford University and project lead for diversity in the British String Quartet alongside my colleague, Professor Samantha Dieckmann. We're delighted to be chairing the discussion today and are very grateful and excited to introduce our expert panelists. So to introduce them now, firstly, Kadiatu Kanneh-Mason writes and lectures widely on diversity in classical music, music education, race and inclusion, and parenting. She is the mother of 7 classical musicians and has recently published the memoir, House of Music, Raising the Kanneh-Masons. Nate Holder is a musician, author, speaker, and music education consultant, and the author of 5 books on music. He is an advocate for decolonizing music education and speaks, writes, and consults on the subject both for companies and organizations and in schools and universities. Philip Herbert is an award-winning composer in the UK and USA whose music has been performed by ensembles such as the BBC Singers, Chineke, and the Royal Ballet Sinfonia. The world premiere of his quartet Solicitudo was heard in our first Symposium concert this week, and he's also an experienced music educator and musician. Ros DeVile is the CEO of Music Masters, a charity that works with schools, teachers, and the music industry to champion diversity and inclusion in music education. And she's also a keen violinist and piano teacher. So welcome all and thank you for joining us today. So today's session is going to be in 2 parts. In our first hour, we will discuss the VQ Creates coaching program for 14 to 18-year-olds that has formed a core component of our project. In this program, we wanted to create opportunities for young people, especially those with little previous experience of classical music, to learn about composition and the string quartet. But we also wanted to evaluate the impact of our program to contribute to a larger discourse around classical music education and diversity. We therefore recruited state schools from around the country, varied both in their location, both urban and rural, and also in their existing music education provision. Our schools are St Marylebone School and Graveney School from London, St Gregory the Great from Oxford, Trinity Catholic School from Nottingham, and Framingham Earl High School from Norfolk. To enable the programme to support students with differing experience of, for example, notation, we recruited student mentors taking the university's Music BA Music in the Community module, and we offered a series of coaching sessions and feedback on the pieces as they progressed, led by the Villius Quartet with support from professional composers and a seminar on the historical British quartet with me. At each stage of the programme, we've also been accompanied by graduate researchers Lauren Braithwaite and Alia Booker, who with Sam Dieckmann have observed and evaluated the process and will complete their research now the programme has reached its end. Today then, we will hear 4 of these student quartets introduced by the composers themselves, and then we'll hear from the panel in response. We will also then hear from our researcher Lauren, 2 of the school teachers involved, Claire Ditcham and Sam Coates, and from members of the Villiers Quartet about their various experiences of the project, its challenges and its rewards. In the second half of today's session, we'll move to a broader discussion of issues of diversity in music education and invite questions. But I should also say that questions and comments are very welcome at any time, so please do drop anything into the Q&A box whenever you feel that you'd like to. So, without further ado, we will begin by seeing some of the quartets that have emerged from our coaching programme and hear from the student composers themselves.
Hello, my name is Kezia and I'm a Year 12 student at St Marylebone School. My string quartet piece is based on an Igbo folk song from Nigeria about a tortoise called Mbe who gets in trouble with the forest spirits for stealing their food. I wanted to incorporate elements of West African rhythm into the piece and also to capture the tricksterish and cheeky personality of Mbe as a character. So much of the rhythm in the piece was based on a specific syncopation figure that's prevalent in a lot of West African rhythm. And I also emphasized the sense of 4 against 6, which is an important fundamental of Igbo music. I was also very inspired by the use of pizzicato and polyrhythms in the Debussy and Ravel string quartets. I was very grateful to be involved in this project, and I think that understanding the theme of diversity in classical music is very important. I believe that classical music is a tool that's been used to express a diverse range of emotions for religious and political purposes, and so therefore it's contradictory that the demographic that composes and performs classical music is so undiverse. I think that a lack of representation in education has discouraged a lot of young people from diverse backgrounds from pursuing careers in classical music. So I think that projects like this one are especially important in empowering young musicians to be classical composers and also to understand how classical music can be used to champion diversity.
Dazed focuses on creating bright, ungloomy atmospheres to represent the thoughts of the thinker. It uses changes in texture, register, and dynamics to help show this contrast. The help of the mentors allowed me to further develop my ideas and structure the piece. Thank you.
I really enjoyed taking part in this project because it gave me something to look forward to and something to motivate me throughout the long weeks. It was really fascinating because we learned all about different composers, and I learned a lot that helped me with my composing and helps me now with my GCSE music course. I was actually really stuck for inspiration at first. I had no idea what to really focus my music on, but I thought, what do I have a lot of experience with and what do I know a lot about? And the answer was COVID, sadly. So I kind of unknowingly created a piece that kind of reflected the moods of COVID and how the lockdown kind of shaped our lives. So some bits are lively, where we all thought everything has come back to normal, and then some bits were like down because we were really sad about everything that was going on. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
Really just thank you, because it was such a great opportunity, and I was really delighted when I was given this opportunity to write a string quartet piece for a proper quartet and be able to have composers and the quartet give feedback on my piece and help me better my composition. It really highlighted the lack of some names, especially male composers and female composers. And yeah, I found it really interesting to learn about some new composers that I've not heard of before. I found it really nice because I'd never written for a string quartet before, and so by writing something that was a bit out of my comfort zone, it really opened up, gave me the opportunity to compose and use techniques that I wasn't familiar with, and really broaden my horizon with. Well, feedback from the composers and the quartet itself was really useful because it made me able to see some of the stuff they said and utilise it, even if it wasn't feedback from my piece, and utilise it in my own compositions, everything as well. Well, some of the challenges was that because I'm not a string player, I felt very uncomfortable about writing for strings, and it wasn't really in my comfort zone. And sometimes I did kind of hit dead ends. It was I didn't know what to do next and just needed time to think and go, what do I want to do next? I think I'll have gained much more of a writing for strings and writing for a quartet. I feel I'm much more comfortable now than I was in the previous months, and I feel like some of the stuff that I learned I'll be able to replicate in other pieces, and also when listening to music I can now hear some of the stuff that I used to not be able to, especially with string quartet music.
So I think, I mean, that was such a really impressive display of creativity there that the students have come out with, and it was so interesting to hear them talk about the project and about their own pieces. So I'd now like to invite the panel members to say something in response to that. So if I might ask you first, Philip, to say what your thoughts were on what the students have achieved on their music, or any other things that you were thinking about.
I thought the students really did well with writing for strings, and showed a very high awareness of how to handle the process of writing for strings. In the first piece by Kezia, I was struck by the use of rhythm, harmonic textures, which are quite interesting, and the exchange of the musical ideas with all the players throughout the quartet. Just beautifully crafted. I think all the quartets had a really great approach to telling a story. Dazed, for instance, had some very interesting approaches to use of harmony, and some very interesting use of dissonances that were quite surprising. And I like the way the piece ended, just kind of suddenly, which kind of left you thinking about the title, Dazed. But very well crafted pieces, showing a really good demonstration of how to write for string quartet.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. And perhaps I could call on Ros next and just ask for your responses to that.
I was so impressed by all of these pieces, and it took me back to my string quartet days. And I could imagine myself playing these pieces. So huge congratulations. I mean, really amazing work. So I had a few kind of individual comments, if I may. So for Kezia's piece, which I absolutely loved, I really loved the harmonies. I loved the changes of texture and mood, and the parts integrating, kind of shadowing each other. I found myself swaying throughout, which is great. And I loved the use of pizzicato and tremolo. And I said it sounds really fun to play. And I'm a big fan of the DeVile quartet, so I was kind of, I loved that. I could hear that influence. And I'm sure it kept the quartet on their toes with the changes of rhythm. So that was brilliant. With Nicholas's piece, Dazed, I love the dynamic use. I thought it was really effective, and the use of articulation. Very interesting harmonies, as Philip said. And I loved the cello melody with the pizzicato from the rest of the quartet underneath. And the unison kind of chord changes I thought were really atmospheric. So brilliant. And I kind of really like the almost a ground bass feeling throughout, which was great. Maya's piece, I wrote down program music because it really took me somewhere. And I think the story of coronavirus, that was really apt. It was very exciting. And I really liked how the quaver motif was passed around, and it really helped to build up that sound. And that ending was brilliant, the punchy ending which was passed around. And Nancy's piece, I mean, Nancy, that was a substantial piece that you've written there. I applaud you for that. It was very beautiful, a really haunting melody, and that kept coming back in different ways. Really effectively supported by the lower strings to add weight there. Some really interesting pieces again, features the tremolo, descending kind of triplet motif was brilliant, and some unexpected harmonies. So yeah, they're my thoughts, but amazing all round.
Yeah, thank you, Ros. And I'm sort of I'm also kind of flagging points as well to start to the discussion, but I want to give all the panelists a chance to speak first. So maybe Nate, would you like to speak next?
Sure. I just want to say, first of all, massive congratulations to all of you who wrote pieces. I mean, you know, just thinking about where I was at that age, you know, I don't want to think about it, to be fair. But I think just you know, just going from the top, right? Like Kezia, I thought it was really, and I think maybe it's something we'll touch on later about, and I'm not sure if that's if you're talking about your own culture, right? Just bringing your own culture into a space which I think often can feel like you can't do that, right? And it reminded me of a saxophonist, Camilla George, who does that often in the jazz scene. So it might actually be a good conversation to have with her, actually, to see, you know, maybe there's a possible collaboration or just conversation. Just, it's always good to network and to get to know other people who are trying to do similar things, right? So massive congratulations on that piece. Love the sense of rhythm throughout, and the idea of bringing a story to a piece and writing for a story which I'm sure many people around the world know already. Reminded me of the stories of Anansi, etc., that many of us might be familiar with, right? And Nicholas, I think that piece really captured the idea, the mood, and the gloomy mood. I think you really captured it perfectly. So massive respect for that. I love there's a lot of interesting harmony that was going on there that I'd love to kind of understand a little bit more. You know, the thought process into all of that. It really, I don't know if it really left me dazed. I think it left me inspired more than dazed, to be honest with you. And the coronavirus piece, I think there was like a sense of hope for me that kind of underpinned the whole thing. You know, the different moods that it went through, even though, you know, there was some, I think we were experienced, right, the ups and downs of it, but I felt like in that piece there was a vein of hope that was running through it all, which I think, if intended or not, that was the effect that it had on me. And I think, you know, that was pretty awesome. And the final piece, I have to say, you know, I think for your first time writing for a string quartet, I don't know really the words. I think this it's a testament to, you know, your own skills and your own willingness to sit and to write and to think about what you're doing. And also, I think it also shows us all, you know, the power of having people around you who can guide you and it can help you do something which you've never done before, which again maybe is something we'll touch on later. But again, massive congratulations. I think you know, to add to Rose's comment, the tremolo, that really grabbed me as well, when that came into the piece. So yeah, massive congratulations to all. And yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Nate. And I'm definitely there with you on reflecting on myself at that age. And I wish I had ever produced anything as good as these 4 quartets. So, and finally, Kadi, could we ask for your thoughts about the student quartets?
I have to say that I was so impressed, and I got about halfway through and I thought, oh no, I'm going to cry, because I was so moved. I've been feeling so unhappy for a long time, so miserable about the state of music education and opportunities for students to actually give something to music. And I thought this was just extraordinary. If I go through them, the first one, Kezia, reminded me so much of before coronavirus. All my children travel to Antigua every year because that's where their family are from. And there's so much collaboration between the Antiguan young people there and the children. And what they do is they bring their local music, the Antiguan folk music or traditional music, into classical music, and the other way around. They play classical music on their instruments. I mean, Bach on the steel pans is amazing. And so I love that idea of collaboration between 2 very different kinds of traditions. And what that brings is something completely new and very exciting and very dynamic. So I was very excited by that piece. And then the second piece, Dazed, I mean, I was excited before it started because my children also went to Trinity Catholic School. and still do some of them. And I just thought that was extraordinary. I was very moved. It gave me an emotion, and I think to be able to do that, music at that age, an extraordinary thing to do, very moving. The next piece, the coronavirus piece, was emotional because all of us have been through a very difficult time, especially musicians and anyone linked to the creative and performing arts. And I was going with that emotional ups and downs. As you can see, I'm talking very emotionally about the music rather than technically, because that's how I was responding to it. And then the last piece, the piece about the maiden's melancholy, made me think a lot about Schubert. And I thought, this is extraordinary. This is a young person writing something which is reflecting back on all those musical classical traditions, but making something very new and very personal. And I think just congratulations to everybody, extraordinary.
Thanks so much. And I want to hear the bark on steel pans now as well. I think that's sort of such a positive example as well of you know, sharing of what some of this has been about, I think, which is sharing music and sharing opportunities to encounter different musics. Because I was struck also by what you said, Nate, about this sort of idea of bringing your own culture into a space in which you're not allowed, because when we were sort of setting the brief, we were playing lots and lots of different string quartets from different composers using different styles to the students, and saying that, you know, here's some ways in which composers have brought their music or their sense of place to their what they're creating, but that shouldn't be determining what you do, that you're free to bring whatever you want to it. So I think it seems like they've really run with that idea in creating things that are, as you say, incredibly personal. I was going to just ask as well, just raise this question of style as well, because you mentioned the sort of feeling of almost the ground bass, Ros, in Nicholas's quartet, and I thought similarly there was almost a sort of a kind of Baroque Renaissance feel at times, and then almost this sort of chanson-like feel to Nancy's piece, and then we get these sort of the fact that Kezia's bringing in both this Nigerian practices and her own, and also her enthusiasm for Debussy and Ravel string quartets. So I wondered if anyone could comment more about these issues of style, because these are sort of maybe come up a lot in music education teaching or compositional teaching, where we say this is how somebody composed, this is how somebody composed. And so I wondered if any of you could sort of reflect on on this aspect of what they've produced, this sort of immense diversity of style.
Well, I mean, I mentioned the fact that the last piece reminded me very much of Schubert and Death and the Maiden, but it was also bringing something very new. And I think it's so important that people who are new to writing and composing actually feel much more courageous about responding and learning about all these old styles and traditions, Baroque, classical, romantic, but then bringing in something from their own lives. And I'm such a fan of that kind of collaboration. And I think also what I find with a lot of young composition is there's no shyness about bringing in feeling, that it's not just saying, oh, this is what we've learned about composition, this is what we're going to do. It's not just structural, it's also very, very meaningful. And I found that I was hearing so much that reminded me of what I'd already heard in string quartets, but something new as well. And I think those two things are really important.
I think it's particularly important for composers to find a voice that actually is able to connect with audiences, and having this courage to write something that comes from someone's own personal culture, I think it's a great thing. And it could be a great attraction for new audiences to come to the concert hall, because they can hear things that they can relate to that come from their own particular culture, as well as other listeners coming to discover something new, which was evident in all of these pieces.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. If I can, just also just to that point of, you know, everyone finding their own voice. I think it's also a question of to ask about how are we helping young people to find their voice, right? As you know, as opposed to telling them they can, you know, how we actually, what are we doing to help them to understand that they, number one, they can, and also how they're going to find their own voice, right? And being safe to do that, and safe to express the things that they want to express in music, the things that they might be going through that we often disassociate from music, or even from the arts in general, or even maybe some art forms are better at allowing us to convey certain meanings and certain messages through them. But you know, this idea of, I think, classical music, and again, maybe this is conversations for later, you know, does it allow for that, and how are we helping children or young people even to understand and to express themselves and to find that voice, instead of saying that they just that they can. It's like, how are we helping them to do that, and are the environments that we create allowing them to do that as well, organically rather than you know, explicitly.
There's also, actually, Nate, if I might ask you a specific question, do you think that all the young people you work with have a sort of very distinctly defined notion of classical music and other musics, that they make those divisions in the way that we tend to in the sort of perhaps educational frameworks?
I think how we often talk about music is very, very kind of boxed, right? And I think it's done for reasons, it's ease of, you know, I'm sure a lot of it comes from marketing, right? Just the ease of having to, of being able to say, well, we're going to work on this particular style of music for a set number of weeks. So I think what tends to happen is that, and that's in my own experiences and other people that I've met, not even just in classical music, but in music in general, is that we get taught that this is what this thing called classical music is, and that's even a question, right? What does the classical and classical music mean? Because that might mean one thing for one person and one thing for someone else in a different part of the world, for example, or even a different time period, right? So I think when we've kind of put these boxes around what different styles are, it becomes very difficult, especially after educating, right, for a number of years, to kind of break out of that and say, well, you haven't been able to compose and do things in a certain way because we've been teaching you this is how to do it. So all of a sudden, when you're 16 now, you can find your own voice and do your thing. And I think it's a very difficult thing to do, when you've been told that this is kind of the way you have to learn these rules, and then, oh no, you don't have to do it anymore. I think it's a very difficult thing to do, for many young people, especially in a genre that for some they don't encounter in their everyday lives, and they don't explore for themselves, right?
Can I just say that I completely agree with that, but from just thinking back to my own experiences, and I didn't take it hugely far, but at university I studied, I suppose, major composition. It was meant to be major free composition, and I had thought that would mean free, you know, free, but it wasn't free. It was kind of, well, yeah, that's nice, but why are there two B flats in that bar? Surely you mean that one of them should be a natural, you know. I feel like there's just an ingrained kind of structure where everything is compared to something else. You know, I remember all of my pieces that I wrote throughout my time as a young person, you know, write something in the style of Debussy, write something in the style of, you know, this and that, and it's then Nate, you're absolutely right, when you're then presented with, well, go for it, you know, go for it, especially when there are still kind of, you know, because there are other people's perceptions of what free means as well, and you're kind of having to deal with all these things. It can be very difficult, I think, and that's just from my perspective, you know. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. I think at this point, just in the interest of time, I'd like to introduce our two teachers. So we've got Claire Ditcham, the head of music at Framingham Earl High School, and Sam Coates, who is director of music at Graveney School. Are you, yeah, I can see everyone now. There's so yeah, welcome Sam and Claire, and thank you for all your hard work on joining everything up and making this project possible and supporting your students to do it. It's been wonderful. And could I please ask both of you at this point for your experience of the project, and either, I mean, do feel free to respond to anything that's been mentioned already, but also, you know, your own thoughts and insights into going through this process with the students. So, I mean, maybe Claire, would you like to go first?
Yeah, if that's all right with Sam. I don't know, because I know Sam's going to teach, hasn't he, shortly, so I didn't know if he wanted to go first. Sam?
Go for it, please.
Okay, that's okay, as long as you're not too short on time. I thought it was a brilliant project. I have to say, in the deep depths of sort of like, you know, coronavirus last year, and then again this year, I thought it was a brilliant thing. It gave me something to look forward to do with the students, but also for them. I think Maya summed it up really well, because Maya was my student, one of the two who got involved in it. And for them, they are both quite active musicians. They do quite a lot out of school as well as in school as well. They're involved. We've got a really great centre that runs at a different high school in the centre of Norwich, which is the Norfolk Centre for Young Musicians. It's supported by the Guildhall, and they go off and do things with that, but that was kind of taken completely away from them during the pandemic, and it's only just now come back face to face. So they sort of had all their musical wings clipped, and I felt that it was a really good thing for them to be able to do something musical through the medium of the internet. I thought that, you know, for them, they're both GCSE students. They are right at the start of their GCSE course. Obviously, they're a little bit further along now. But when the project first started, they were right at the beginning. Obviously, they've had their Key Stage 3 lessons, but I've been in post not very long, and music has been something at the school that's been neglected for a little while. So I'm still making inroads. But you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. You know, it takes a little while. It's a bit cheesy, but it is. So you know, it was fantastic to have a project that kind of supports their learning and their development as musicians. So, and I felt that they learned so much from the quartet. The quartet were amazing with them. And you know, watching them in the sessions, they engaged so well with everything that happened, and I'm really proud of the music, you know, they produced, because they were two of the youngest, I think, on the project as well. So they were very much, they're 14, really young, compared to the sixth formers. So you know, their experience was not massive, and it's really helped them in many ways, both with their knowledge. They're both violinists. It's helped them get to know their instrument better. Helped them to know how their instrument can be used really well within an appropriate context. They could go on to write a quartet. Now they've got the skills for their GCSE. I feel for next year, for assessment purposes, I think that set them up really well for that. They've got better skills from specialists. I'm not a string player, I'm a brass player. I've got knowledge, but it's not quite as good as it could be, you know, because I'm not a string player. So that specialist knowledge is invaluable. And I think, you know, in terms of their general musicianship and notation skills as well, I think that they know far more than they could have done. And I know I think Maya very much has the potential to go on and do music, you know, A-level, possibly beyond. So, and I hope this has helped her possibly consider that that's a good thing to do as well. So, although she's very modest about what she created.
Well, she shouldn't be.
I know.
Yeah. So thank you, Claire. And Sam, how was the experience with Graveney? Because you had it was a slightly older class who were involved, and also there were quite a few more of them. So Graveney is a bigger music setup than Framingham Earl at present, I think.
Yes, actually, the students were also in year 10, so they were the same.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
But because they had come to us as quite advanced musicians when they joined the school, they took their GCSE early in year 9 last year. And part of the reason of us doing that is we're running this kind of bridging course in year 10 and year 11 that allows us to look more broadly at music than the Key Stage 4 and 5 syllabi will allow. So looking at things that are sometimes neglected from those syllabuses. So this project came perfectly, actually, and it fits into what we wanted to do with the students. And also in the middle of kind of a wider look at how we're teaching music, why we're teaching music, and what are we teaching, particularly at Key Stage 3, when that's our moment to, you know, get every single student and to, you know, bring them along with us. Because I think actually, certainly at my school, I'm not sure how you feel, Claire, but our students are really politically and socially engaged, much more so than I think when I was at school. And they responded, even students, I mean, I don't want to call any student non-musical, the kind of student in Key Stage 3 where they wouldn't necessarily have responded as well in music lessons up until now. We did a lesson on when we looked at the Arrangement of Jerusalem by Erilyn Wallen from the proms this year. And because we just down the road from Windrush Square in Brixton, so we can talk a bit about the Windrush generation, and then also that links into, I think, what possibly Nate or Kadiatu was saying about voice and about a composer's voice, particularly when that's kind of stamped on top of this kind of very strict classical tradition, which a really broad range of students found fascinating. And it makes our job as educators, I think, much easier, and to have things like, I'm a big fan of Nate's work, and also, for example, now having like the Kanneh-Masons and Chineke with so many video resources and things, so that the go-to can be something that is instantly diverse. I mean, there's a long way to go, but it is so much better than it was a couple of years ago. But particularly with our students, this idea of a symposium, like the meeting of ideas, I think was really interesting for them. Kind of a window into music academia and appreciation. We listened to Florence and Amanda's piece yesterday, and they really loved it, because we had a really great session with Florence, and she really went above and beyond to kind of show them different things they could do with the quartet. They particularly loved it when Katie from the quartet just, workshop things live for them, because I think that enabled them to think it was their own voice. I think when you're teaching composition, there's a real delicate balance that you want to advise and say, oh, is that what you mean? Or, this might sound like this. Have you considered this? Without taking away their agency, if you get what I mean. So I think to have the musicians there workshopping things live, it allowed them to make their own decisions and then reflect. And it might take a few days, it might take a week for them to change something, but having heard it themselves. And what a fantastic opportunity to have the Villius Quartet playing these pieces. Like, they were blown away by the musicianship. And I think one of my students yesterday said, I can't believe their cellist played every single piece of articulation that I wrote. Like I see that when I play things, I usually like take notice of half of them. So I think, again, it really did feel like a real kind of mind expanding kind of moment for them. And then, of course, Joe, your sessions on, these often overlooked composers that are featuring in the rest of the symposium, that it's just been so wonderful and so fantastic for them to have an opportunity to compose away from the exam, away from the idea of like it being marked as, oh, have you developed melodies in this way? Have you used styles and conventions in this way? That it did really feel like a genuine, opportunity for them. So thank you so much.
That's wonderful to hear, because it actually, what you just said about how you develop melody, it reminded me of the stage I'm at with my own children's education, with fronted adverbials and expanded noun phrases and all these mysterious concepts that are the measure of writing rather than what do they want to say. So that's wonderful. I mean, I thought I'd like to invite any of the panelists to respond to the teachers, but I thought also perhaps a particular question that's hovering in my mind as a result of what you've said is also how could we take this kind of opportunity forwards? What do you think would be the things that we can take forward that would be valuable? Because we've loved doing this, and I think there's always the challenge is when you do something once and then you have the funding to do something once and then you can't repeat it. So what can we take forwards from this? And I might just throw in there as well a comment from the audience from Ron Tendler saying that, I mean, he shares your thoughts, Sam, about the GCSE syllabus and how that can be restrictive to students, and that this shows what can be achieved. So,
and that's
sorry, Sam. Sorry.
That's not to badmouth, I mean, the GCSE syllabus too much. I mean, how do you fit everything you want to fit into a limited amount of time and experience? And how do you get both the breadth and the depth? It's a constant struggle, I think. But in terms of taking forwards, certainly some of the resources that you created, you shared with us, I will definitely use those again, and I will have a bit more confidence to, in using those resources. So that's certainly in my school, but on a wider platform, I'm not sure. Perhaps Claire was about to answer that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think some of the resources, particularly in the Google Drive, they're future-proof, that we've got them now. That I think that they were amazing and they still can be used really widely. I think that that's something that you've got now that's there, and that can be shared further and wider perhaps, but obviously with people's permission, because you have to ask permission. They're, people they own their materials. But I thought they were really good. I kind of agree with some of what Ron says, that, GCSE sadly is a little bit of a tick box exercise, because there's a set of criteria and it has to be assessed and measurable, in order to get an exam. But it is sometimes quite restrictive, because by the nature of it, because you can't just say, oh, go off and compose something and let them, or give them sort of that freedom, because there is ultimately in that specification that you are provided a list of quite relatively narrow things that you say, or has it got this, then there's that list of things that an exam board is expecting to see when it goes off to be moderated. And that is kind of the nature of the beast across. It's not just music that features in. There's a lot of GCSEs where there is that box, and there has to be a national standard where it's measurable. And we kind of have, and Sam, it's a cheesy Sam, but we have to kind of play the game to get that qualification done, because that is the nature of what we do in schools. But it's not easy to sell your soul, because it kind of goes against everything that we are as musicians and creative people.
Thanks so much. Sorry, Ros, you had your hand up.
Oh no, I'm just thinking about the legacy of the project. Obviously, I'm very lucky to be brought in at this point and to hear the fantastic pieces, and I wish I'd been there to see the workshopping process and all of that, because I'm sure it was fascinating. I just wonder whether on a kind of, I don't know, on a wider scale, it's possible to think about how conservatoire and university music students could potentially work with young people and do kind of link up with schools to work in this way, and because it seems to be very valuable. And I'm thinking, I know funding is difficult to come across, but it feels like it should just be part of the learning experience. I know, obviously, Sam, what you do with your students at Oxford is fantastic, and they go into the communities. And I just wonder whether there's something that can be done almost on a wider scale, having groups of kind of university or conservatoire good musicians working with school age children almost as standard. It feels like there must be something there. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I come from Australia, where we don't have the hub system the way that it is here. So I find the hub system quite interesting in terms of trying to bring together professionals and various people with students. The other side of the debate is, of course, then is that outsourcing it, and not giving enough resources directly to the schools and the music teachers. I've taught, my background's in secondary school education myself, so I share that with Sam and Claire. And it was really struck me, you were talking about the specialist knowledge stuff, Claire, which I really felt, you're a brass player and, you just didn't have that extra level. It occurs to me that the students, you mentioned that they were quite advanced, Sam, your students, they were quite advanced musicians, and Claire, that both of the students that did it in your group are string players, even though all very young. And like everyone else, I'm completely blown away with what's been produced, and similarly aware of how I would not have been able to do the same at that age. I wonder if I could invite reflections on the accessibility of this when we think of forward going. I mean, there was a certain level of knowledge that these students brought into this project to be able to actually produce, to be taken that step further, and whether the teachers have any reflections on that with respect to the students that you have that may not have been able to engage, or what other additional kind of resources would have been helpful to allow that to happen for some other students.
Sam, do you want to go first?
So I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding your question properly, that because of these students obviously did the project had a musical background, and they had lots of the skills that would have already helped them along this way. For me, I certainly see like the beginning of year 7 when they come to us, that is our prime time to try and kind of convince music is a thing that is a part of them. And I think when they're settling into secondary school, there's probably about a grace period, a couple of months, where they're trying to work out who they are. And then if they decide that, oh, this music thing, it's not me, then it's much harder to win them back in the end. But there's some good things going on at primary now. We see the standard of musicians coming to us at year 7 has definitely got better in the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, because now if you ask a class of year 7s, almost all of them will have done some kind of wider opportunities like instrumental programming year 3 or year 4. And then now there's obviously there's the new model music curriculum that's just been released. And there's good things in there. There's some things that I think the practitioners will want to do differently depending on where they are. But it's definitely going to improve, hopefully, the provision for students entering secondary school. So I think that is the moment to get them, and perhaps we could play them some of these compositions by students who are just about a few years older than them and say, look, this is you in 3 years' time. You know, this music is this is you. This is equally you as it is you. It's not, you know, a fancy far off special thing, I think.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Joanna.
Oh, no, you go first, please.
I think I agree with what Sam says. I think that the modern music curriculum, although it's not statutory, which does make it a little bit tricky, but you know, we're awfully good at. I attended a training course this week, and the guy who was running it said that we are all awfully good at following guidance now, given the last year and the pandemic guidance that we're being given. So hopefully, you would hope that, you know, lots of primary schools will be on board with it and at least take some elements from it and run them as part of their music curriculum. I'm very lucky that Norfolk has an excellent hub. Mostly led, I think a lot of that is led from the top. Alison Bell previously was in, she was previously under a different name because she changed her name, but she was in Lincolnshire, and she ran the hub really well there. She's moved down to Norfolk now, and we're really lucky. They support our primary schools fantastically. I don't pretend that it's a perfect system, the hub system. I see that Ron in the chat has said that, you know, he finds problems with the hub system. It's not perfect, but it's better than what we had. Say, you know, I've been a teacher in Norfolk for 21 years, and previous to the hub, it was very difficult. And there's certainly a huge amount more. The opportunities they provide for all of our primary children now to have that instrumental tuition is brilliant. You know, I get children who come to me now who have actually picked up a musical instrument previous to them arriving with me in year 7, because previously that wasn't the case. Lots of children arrived having barely done anything at primary school. So at least now there are more children coming through who've had a better musical experience. I think I've got a lot of hearts and minds to win in Norfolk with perhaps where music can go in terms of a career and going beyond high school, because obviously we're only 11 to 16 at my school. A lot of people in Norfolk, unfortunately, do not see music and being a musician as a viable career. I grew up in Norfolk, and I'm a musician as a teacher, so you know, it can happen. So you know, I see that as really important. You talk about legacy. I think having people who are further up along that journey working with schools would be really good, because it helps the young people see where they can get to and what is actually possible. So it's not in isolation in their school, you know, because Norfolk we're a very rural, isolated high school. You know, opportunities are not thick on the ground, particularly at the moment. Having those opportunities, you know, even if it's in a virtual forum across the internet, that's fantastic as far as I'm concerned, because even to travel, you know, from Norfolk where we are, to travel, you know, to somewhere where things are happening a little bit more, it's a long way because we are so rural and isolated.
And Clara, do let's take up that conversation as well about showing them the possibilities of music careers as well, because that's the kind of thing we can facilitate Oxford. So, you know, I'd love to you know, I'd love to talk to them about that topic, for example.
Yeah.
I was just going to say also with the issue of accessibility, I mean, I would like to mention, you know, I mentioned St. Gregory the Great School in Oxford, who we started working with at the beginning of the project. And then actually that's a school at the moment that doesn't have a music teacher. So we were working with one of the assistant heads, and they have someone coming in from the music hub to teach it to the years, the sort of years 7 to 9. And that's pretty much it. So we had one student who started off, and then he just felt this was too much. I think he was just sort of too isolated. So I think that was, although we tried very hard to include him, that this was sort of almost like it shows the barrier where there's schools where there's sort of no music provision between or the support of music teachers, and that was our kind of failure point almost, where we couldn't, get bring them through the program. I was also going to just say, on response to the legacy point and what Ros was saying, and that I mean, one of the other hats I wear in my day job is making digital resources available for people. So I do think this, like the idea you're talking about, Ros, about sort of offering, almost creating something that's training that can be then taken out, supported by web resources, that's a definite possibility. And it seems like that would be a positive possibility for sort of legacy as well. Yeah. I'm going to, I know that Sam has a class to teach and we're sort of running slightly behind schedule. So I'd really like to thank Sam and Claire again so much for participating. And at this point, we'll say goodbye to them for now. And we're also going to now introduce Carmen Flores and Leo Melvin from the Villius Quartet, and also Lauren Braithwaite, our graduate researcher, and hear from them about their experience of the project too. So we have a lot of panelists. So, but yes, I can see I can see Lauren and Carmen and Leo. So hello, and Carmen and Leo, perhaps we can start with you. And what have your thoughts been about the project and your experience of it with all the challenges and rewards?
Hi, everyone. Thank you. It's really great to see you. And we've just been, eavesdropping over the last few minutes about your reactions. And we're really excited that it's come together on this day for you to see the results. This project has been a long time coming, actually, over the last few years. And it started where we were based in Nottingham with live workshops. We linked up with the Nottingham Music Hub, and they provided a lot of, talking with them about what their needs were for music education. And one thing that came out of it was secondary schools, for some reason, there was a gap. There was a lot of provision at the time for primary school music education, but once the students got to secondary school, they realized this huge drop off of interest. And so we deliberately said, okay, what can we provide to capture those secondary students? What kind of project might make them still interested in music? And so we thought, okay, we're doing composition workshops, composers is something we're very interested in. Let's see if we can get the kids to find their voice, as Nate said earlier. How can we help them express? Because that's a angst-ridden time. It's really difficult to figure out what you want. And so, I mean, we were a string quartet. How can we help people find creativity? I know it's difficult, but maybe this is a unique way to get teenagers to engage with music. And so we started visiting schools. It helped us develop our materials to share about string quartet writing. We worked very closely with a professor of composition at the University of Nottingham, Dr. Elizabeth Kelly. She also helped us. And then COVID hit. So suddenly we were just, we can't go into the schools. What do we do? Let's take it all online. Like everybody else, we had to adapt really quickly. So we did run a first wave only with Nottingham schools. And that was funded by the Arts Council Emergency Fund. And it was a real, kind of grabbing things, how do we put things together? We ran the workshop online and tinkered, always building on our process. And then when the symposium came, we were able to, again, how can we adjust things? And this was the first time we worked directly with teachers in schools, because in the previous iteration, schools weren't meeting. It was only with kids who, found out about it and joined. But this time we worked with the schools, and that added another layer of, the relationship we had with teachers and how important it is to build that. You can't just walk up into a place and say, we're going to do this. It was very important to listen to what each of those communities needed, and then we find a way to adjust. So from the musician and as a performing ensemble point of view, there was a mindset change of, we don't just come in and say, this is what we're going to do. It had to be linked up very carefully and to listen to the needs of that community.
Yeah, I thought I'd just say something about the actual experience of the workshops. I really enjoy, I do a lot of teaching as well myself, but I always enjoy working with kids because, well, the sort of more inexperienced they are, the more fun it is actually, because the more you can offer them. And I was really pleased to hear somebody gave me a shout out about me doing all the articulations correctly. That really has cheered me up. And because I think it was really important for them to see how seriously the performers take their writing. It is, after all, everything to us. It's everything to me. Interpreting what's on the page. And while I felt like I could offer them, myself personally, could only offer them a very limited advice on composition, because I'm not good I can't compose anything. I've not really tried. I never really had the courage. That's what another thing I admire is the courage of these young kids to actually put themselves out there. I remember the feeling of fear, not wanting to do that, for fear of it being, rubbish and people not liking it. And also another thing I really loved about it was how much they loved to hear their pieces come to life. When we played it, absolute without fail, every single one of them said that and was really delighted about it. And that was, it never got old to hear that, from each of them. It was really nice to hear that. And it was nice to just show them, the performer's perspective. And I thought that this is surely a valuable thing. I mean, because a lot of them, it was very new to them, had never come across professional performers who really take what's on the page very seriously. So a lot of them sort of thought, oh God, so I wasn't that specific in my piece because I didn't realize you would take it so seriously, And then a lot of the others thought, I didn't think you would, pick out everything that I've played, that I've written. So yeah, I mean, the whole thing was just really fun, and it would just be nice to do more of it. Of course, in person would be nicer as well. But yeah, I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, I think this kind of rigorous attention to detail, and the expectation that, we were taking your music seriously, and obviously it's in an educational setting, so we're supportive, but what you put on the page really affects how we work, and working with the students more as collaborators rather than, I guess, talking down to them too much, but saying, look, here's how we can create this thing together, and you give us your materials and we'll try our best to make it happen for you.
Thanks so much for that insight, and I can, my own sort of teenage composing self can relate to yours, Leo, I think, with the sort of nervousness and also the sort of obliviousness to performance. But I'd like to again invite the panel to can anyone like to respond at this point about the or to ask any questions of the quartet?
Well, I was going to.
Sorry. Go on.
No, I was just going to congratulate you, because I think what's missing in education generally at the moment is this live creativity, this honouring of creativity. And I think it is very important to have all the tools to create something. I call the fronted adverbials that Joe was talking about. But you also have to have this idea of creativity. And I think that's not being recognised in education at the moment. You have to jump through all the tick boxes. It's all very dry and all very restrictive. And I think you have to have both. And I think what's wonderful about having real live professional musicians who make it into a living thing is so important. And I think that wonderful respect that your string quartet had for those children's writing will stay with them forever. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
Nate, were you were speaking there? Nothing.
Yeah, apologies. I was just thinking, as you were talking, I was just thinking, especially when you know, the reaction to them, and how your professionalism came across to them in, you know, the details, and just thinking about how much does education prepare for these real life consequences, right, of what you do, of your creations, you know. So it's one thing to create, you know, in your classroom and your teacher sees it and gives you a grade and that's it. But it's another thing to say, actually, there are consequences to when I do this note, or I do this here and I do this wrong. Actually, potentially someone can't actually play that, right? Or if I do it in this way, maybe this emotion comes out of it, which I had no idea, because maybe I'm composing on software, right? So I don't know exactly how that translates, what those real life consequences are. So I just wonder how in education we can close that gap between, you know, the education side of things and the real life side of things, and I think projects like this really can help kids. And, you know, again, going back to, you know, who actually has access to these amazing collaborations, right? I think helping all kids to understand that, you know, the music that you make can and does in many different ways have real life consequences. So, you know, in composing, you know, you can affect people in ways you never thought you could. You know, especially, I'm much more a fan of live music than I am of recorded, if possible, right? So, you know, especially if you can work with people who know what they're doing, and also just that idea of, you know, you might be struggling, maybe playing, you know, as a violinist or a cellist, a violist, you know, and then actually working with someone who's doing it on a high level. Just that experience, that contact with any of you, I'm sure it would have been absolutely invaluable. Maybe even have encouraged some to take up an instrument where they didn't want to in the first place, or they felt like they couldn't. You know what I mean? So just lots more thoughts, but that's all for me.
And I'm really struck just by what both of you said there, and what Kadi said about respect, because it seems like there's so much in the curriculum that is about saying, how are you measuring up against the checklist? And this is more saying, what do you want to say, and how can I perform that? Because also, I mean, I think just to, you know, a wider observation that so much of the debate at the moment around music education is almost saying, you ought to do this, you ought to do that, you ought to study this, you ought to study that, rather than saying, what can we offer you? What would you like to explore? And it's a sort of very different way of, as you've been saying, Nate, giving children those opportunities to discover their creativity, to discover different musical languages to express that.
And on that, I'd even say, just a very random thought, but it's we spoke about earlier, talking about like this. It's a difficult time for a lot of, you know, children trying to figure out who they are and what's going on. And it just strikes me as interesting that we're asking children to decide on many different things, knowing that that's what's going on at the very same time, right? Like why are we asking children to have these huge decisions, make these huge decisions, you know, relatively huge decisions, right, at that point of their lives, especially when we know, you know, they're going through just the biological changes that happen at certain ages, notwithstanding the other, you know, the sociological things that might be happening, coronavirus notwithstanding, and, you know, just things that might be happening at home, or and everything else, the turmoil that happens when you're in your early teens, right? But we're asking them to, you know, find your voice in amongst all of that. It kind of strikes me as interesting that, you know, is there a better way to do it? Is there a different way to do it? I don't know about better, but is there a different way to do it where there's, you know, there's not that?
sorry, if I may, I had a thought about that. One thing I noticed about when we did these workshops is that all the kids sort of loosened up a bit, after a while, once they've sort of realized that we weren't there for them personally, we were there for their music. And that sort of takes away all of their insecurities and their shyness and embarrassment or whatever, and lets them just focus on what we're doing, the job at hand, which is also kind of good training for any profession, isn't it, really? And I think they all responded well to that. They were all relieved to find out that we were only there for their music. And that's what I find something when I teach as well, teach kids, is that I'm only interested in the music that we're making and how to make it better. And that enables them to really, it lets them free up, yeah, I really noticed that.
Sorry, Roz, I think you've been waiting to say something, and I have, there's so many of us on screen that I keep missing. So.
Oh, no, well, thank you. I just want to say again, congratulations, it's absolutely wonderful. And I wanted to pick up on the point of the co-creation, because it's something that I'm really passionate about, and my colleagues at Music Masters, and I think it's really wonderful that you're approaching it like that. I was interested in how they found that, the students found that, whether they were surprised, whether they whether they actually thought, is this for real, can I properly open up, or whether you found it difficult to do that, because it's quite different to what they may have otherwise experienced. So I was just wondering.
Well, it did, a part of, I think inherent in the whole process is that they are building a relationship with us. So we were very, it was important to us that we met with them over a series of months. So that familiarity, but also a more holistic view, in addition to the live workshops, we had sessions with them individually, so they would get to know who we were. We brought in composers, or some of our from home composers, to also help us. So they met professional composers as well. So they had all these angles of different perspectives coming in. But I think it was to try and erase that barrier. When you think classical music, you think, oh, I must be in a certain mode and my back kind of stiffens up. But we wanted to show, we're just humans, and we're also going through this journey with them. And so that support, we weren't there to judge them. We were there to help make their music better, help them, find how they can express their thoughts. And we also did a very graded approach where we didn't want to overwhelm them with how to put things in notation immediately. It was just, maybe just give us a thread of an idea, and here you can hear what it sounds like, and then go away and build on it perhaps. It was very, very gradual. And then by the end, it's suddenly the ideas started to flow near the end. And we were getting we had, I think it originally said maybe 1 to 2 minutes. And some pieces are 6 minutes, 7 minutes. They had so much to say. So it takes time, and definitely with teenagers to feel comfortable. But I think that relationship building over months is very crucial.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I think just actually on this point you've just raised, Carmen, about the perceptions of classical music and whether we all sort of stiffen up and put on our black tie at that moment. It would be a great time to bring in Lauren and to ask for your insights briefly into as a research observer into the project, and if you have any hot takes on on the results so far, that would also be very interesting, but although you may not, of course.
Thank you, and I have to say it's been a pleasure to observe this project and watch it develop, watch it unfold, and to see the students, because I wasn't involved in a couple of the observations. My colleague Ali was also doing some of the observations, and so I hadn't really had any taste of the students' compositions, and watching them on Monday evening was quite astounding. I mean, I shouldn't be I shouldn't be shocked at how incredible these compositions were, but I really thought that they were quite a testament to the students and to the mentors, the quartet, and everyone involved in the project. And I think for me, my first observation, listening to everyone's feedback, listening to the students' comments earlier that we heard, is that how the project furnished a space in which these young students felt comfortable to express and engage with some quite personal and quite challenging concepts and ideas about identity, about how they're feeling. And I think it's quite important for them to have that trust and be able to explore these ideas in a space where they feel comfortable, and they feel comfortable to pass that on to someone else to express in music and to perform and realize that sonically. So yes, I think that for me was my major takeaway. In terms of the research is multi-methods. So there's quite a lot of aspects to the research, which takes a lot of organization and a lot of forward planning. So we're looking at the project from many different perspectives. We're going to be getting the perspectives of the mentors, the students, the teachers, the quartet, everyone who's been involved in different ways with the project. We want to know how they experience the project, how they would like to see future projects implemented. What would they change? How could we expand or incorporate different things into this sort of project? The challenges, of course, this year has been extremely challenging for everyone, and in some ways the online platform, the online mode, was challenging in terms of technical difficulties. But at the same time, I think from my perspective, I realized that with online with these online platforms, you can include more people. And you can reach more students, and that, in terms of accessibility and inclusivity, that really is very important. We've been, one of the major parts of the project, the research project, was to get the students to fill in a questionnaire at key points in the project. So right at the beginning, before they had any interaction with the mentors or the quartet. Then after the second workshop and after the third workshop, and then we're going to do the same thing after the symposium. And the questions we're asking are about their own identity as a musician, as a listener, as a performer, what their own musical tastes are, what sort of engagement in music they have in school and outside of school, but also their opinions around classical music and the British Student Quartet, how they conceptualize classical music, whether they see it as something accessible, not accessible, elitist, something that's diverse. And so we're looking at how their perceptions may have changed over the course of the project. And unfortunately, we don't have any results to share quite yet. But I think listening to the students earlier, I think definitely, even if their opinions haven't changed, their awareness around these issues definitely has been increased, and that's definitely an important step. But I think from the questionnaires we'll get more of an idea of how they look differently at their own place and their own contribution to music, and how they can access classical music. The next part of the research project, which I personally am really looking forward to, will be to interview in focus groups the different people who have been involved, the students, teachers, the quartet, and the mentors, to look at how they experienced the project there, and get some more personal, in-depth contributions from them. So I think overall the project really, I think, building on something Ros said earlier about how we sort of compartmentalize different stages of education. You know, you have your primary, you have your secondary, then you have your tertiary, and then there's the professionals. And I think what this project shows is that if we all work from these different stages of music education, if we all work together and we all contribute together, amazing things can happen. And I think that's a really important step to increasing access, increasing what we can do with music education.
Thanks so much for those insights, Lauren. I'm conscious of our time, that we've gone very far over in the first hour. So I'd just like to sort of ask briefly if the panel want to directly respond to Lauren at this point, or if we'd like to sort of carry these points through seamlessly into our broader discussion of music education and where we go at this point. Okay, I think that's a vote for option B. So at this point, thank you so much to Carmen and Leo and Lauren again for joining us and for your thoughts and for your amazing contributions to the project. We're really looking forward to the outcomes of the research and to building on that later. And I'm going to hand over to Sam at this point. So,
thank you very much.
Thanks, Carmen, Leo, and Lauren. Seamlessly, Lauren's mentioned the research. She's brought in the element of the various levels working together, which is something that Roz was also kind of gesturing towards earlier with respect to ideas about legacies and so on. And maybe before we hear from our panelists, kind of a summative, if you like, ideas about music education, we can bring in some of these tertiary students that were involved, because I think that just fits really nicely with respect to where Lauren left off, of how we can actually intersect these various levels. And they might have some questions for the panel on what they observed. So these are students that are undergraduate students at Oxford University that have taken, have mentored really the secondary school students, kind of providing some continuity where the Villius Quartet members and the professional composers that came in between those sessions to kind of provide some oversight of the compositional process and just be there to answer questions that the secondary school students may have had. And so, you know, with respect to the research, I'm part of that research team. And for me, it's really important not just to see, you know, all the positives and speak to the people for whom it worked, but actually to find out, again, as I kind of mentioned before, who is not engaging, why are they not engaging? And, you know, it may be that some people's opinions don't change by the end of it. And then what would they need to engage with music, and what are their thoughts? But it would be great to hear the perspectives of these students from Oxford University's Faculty of Music with respect to, you know, how they've been involved with the project and any questions they may have. So I would love to bring in Carrie. Is that, we've got Emma, Carrie, and Chloe. Thanks all for being here. Maybe Carrie, you have something that you might want to pose to the panel.
So I think my question is mainly aimed towards Nate, but because I guess kind of based off the idea that we talked about a lot in the quartet workshops about how the idea is that they're largely seen as a Western based music. I was wondering if there are any approaches you think need to be taken in music education to enable students to compose in styles other than Western classical music, for example, styles from countries that aren't based on Western notation and harmony.
Sure, I think to kind of try and answer that question like quickly, right? I think it's a question of representation and just allowing children to see the possibilities, right? I think in the same way that this project has happened, where you've got professionals the classical music space entering into the education space. I think it's the same approach to take with, you know, from whichever genre, from whichever background it is, getting professionals in from whether it be, you know, Southern Asia, or whether it be, you know, West Africa, or whether it be, you know, South America, like wherever it is, getting professionals in wherever possible to share their experiences and do, if not a similar thing, but to at least, you know, talk about their cultural backgrounds and share their music and how they compose, why they compose, why they don't do certain things and why they choose to do other things. I think, and then also it's not just about that, it's also about helping, I think, teachers, giving them the tools to be able to, you know, not only to teach, but to facilitate, right? I don't think it's always about teaching. Sometimes, you know, I think it's understanding that we all have our limitations, and we all have our preferences, our own biases, if you will, and our own areas of expertise. And I think sometimes it's important to step back from that and allow others to do the teaching, if you will, and allow others to share their experiences. And I think that really, and like I said, I'm trying to keep it short, but you know, it really starts to help us to look at the whole system and reimagine it and think, well, what are the possibilities if we kind of take the shackles off, if we stop, you know, grouping children with, you know, different key stages and understanding there's so many different variations in ideas and levels. And we're talking about classical music for one right now, right? And there's so many other genres which, and other styles which are influenced by, have used, you know, classical music. And again, this question of what is classical music anyway, right? According to who? So I feel like I'm going way off the original question. But yeah, I think a big thing is really diversity, and ensuring that diversity is of a particular level of authenticity and quality as well, as much as possible at the same time.
Thank you
so much, Nate. Emma.
Hi, my question's on sort of similar lines, but not identical. So again, Nate might be a good person to answer this question, but also any of the perspectives I'm sure will be useful. So in the sort of lectures in the lead up to the introductory lectures of the project program, there was a focus and sort of a theme on British music, and definitely an encouragement for the students to sort of place themselves within the tradition of British composers. And I was just thinking, given like the very real danger of far-right British nationalism at the moment, what the sort of ethical implications of having that as such a major theme in music education?
In terms of Britishness and what that means?
Yeah, and just sort of, instead of, I said there's like so many different ways students will identify themselves. So encouraging Britishness as like the sort of main context for themselves as a composer.
Yeah, I think this looks at, I think this is where we start to look at, you know, what is the British Empire, what is it, and how have we all kind of become this melting pot of people from different places, and you know, how is the British Empire really affected the world, and not just our world, but the world, you know, the worlds that have been, in a sense, right, like throughout time. I think it does come down to helping us to understand, you know, as individuals, where we all come from, as groups where we come from and where we want to go, right? It's an interesting question, because there was in conversations about I think I did something recently at the with the English Dance and Music Society and folk music society, and you know, they're thinking about, you know, do we change the name, you know, English, right? How are we thinking about this name of English? What does that mean? You know, and I think there, and then again thinking about how in that conversation talking about Germany, and how in certain points of history we've seen, you know, when nationalism is kind of, you know, taken up, and specifically in Germany back in the 18th century and early 19th century, and how music was an integral part of, you know, these nationalist ideas, and how it started to spread. I think it's important that we really, you know, we have to think about it, because we're seeing not the same thing, but we're seeing different, you know, similar ideas of, you know, Britishness come about now. And again, it's a wider conversation to have about, you know, how we're taught about who we are, and that's I think a separate conversation from music, but at the same time, it's definitely a part of it. And helping us to understand that in learning about music, it's not, for me anyway, just about learning about notes. It's about learning where these notes have come from, and who has said what these notes mean and what they are, right? So again, I don't think I've answered your question at all, but I think it's a good question, and this idea of Britishness, I think in many different ways we're all kind of wrestling with. I think personally for me, it's wrestling with what it means to be, these slashes we might attribute to ourselves, a Black Brit, or a person from the Caribbean living in Britain, being born in Britain, but having a culture which is other than Britishness, right? And what my music says when I create music, how does that affect what I write about and who I write about and who I think about and so on, right? Again, I don't think I'm answering your question, but those are my thoughts.
I think you're speaking to it all. I don't know, Emma, if you have a follow-up, or otherwise if the rest of the panel might have something to say. Philip.
I think that's an interesting question. And as Nate said, there are other perspectives that are related to music that we need to be thinking about when passing on ideas about music and delivering music education. And I've found from personal experience, sometimes I've written something that's considered to be within the British English tradition, and someone's asked a question as for why I did this, and where are you from, and what's your place in this tradition. So it is something that we all need to think about and reflect on, and find strategies for helping us all to settle ideas on what is Britishness and how it manifests itself in music and translates in strategies for music education.
If I could, sorry, might interject. I mean, I think that you were possibly, it was my lecture that was part of what prompted you with this, Emma. So yeah, I've got some fault to claim. But I think the reason that we focused on this question in the context of the whole project, and then we sort of set up this theme of diversity and a British focus in the VQ creators as well, is just because it has become so contentious recently. So the idea of last night of the proms, of who is represented, of who do these different musics belong to. And I'm also struck with what Philip just said, because also we heard from Des Oliver in his keynote this morning, where he said one example of something that goes around is saying, well, the term composer is in some way, imposing a kind of Western classical framework. But he says, for him, he doesn't want someone to say he's not a composer because he's worked hard to achieve that status. So that there's a really kind of delicate balance. And I think also that we heard these complexities from Alex Ho yesterday in the composer panel, and in his piece where he's sort of got bits of God Save the Queen and things being sort of fragmented. So I mean, yeah, I think I see exactly the sort of almost the danger you suggest, is that it's sort of saying you have to consider yourself in this framework. But I think there was more of a focus to try and reflect on those questions, as Nate and Philip had said.
Thanks so much, Joe, for that insight, and to Emma for the question, and the panelists for their great answers. Chloe.
Hello, this is an open question to everyone. I would love to hear from you all about some formative moments in your music education experience, whether as an educator or a student, and to ask how we as mentors can help create moments and opportunities like those in a supportive environment for students. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to hear from you all.
Thank you so much, Chloe. If we don't mind, I might bring in Kadi to start with this, and in a way it sort of leads to you all presenting your statements as well. I'm looking at the time, so maybe if you could integrate that personal experience with some of the broader points that you wanted to make about music education. Thanks so much, Kadi.
Shall I just read my statement? Because I probably
Yeah.
So for our family, classical music has featured as a source of great pleasure, solace, energy, expression, protest, emotional and intellectual stimulation. I can't imagine my childhood, or my children's childhood particularly, without classical music. For us, there were several ways that we interacted with music, all kinds of music. So it was listening to music on CD, radio, and live in concert halls, churches, venues, learning to play instruments and to perform, having the experience of playing with others, and learning to compose, arrange, and experiment with music, enabling all children to engage with music, to learn to play to a competent or excellent standard, to understand how it is written and how to read and write it themselves, to express themselves through it and to interact and collaborate musically with others. All this is vital for the building of self-esteem, forging creative intelligence, understanding others, learning to listen and to empathise. The list goes on. And that is the point, enabling all children. Classical music is labelled as being elitist, unnecessary, an unimportant, touchy-feely add-on at the periphery of the central intellectual subjects. Yet music is central to most private schools, while being underfunded or completely absent in many state schools. We in the UK have what is increasingly a two-tier education system, and the deprivation of music for certain sections of society is a crisis that needs to be addressed. It's a class crisis, a cultural crisis, a gender crisis, and a race crisis. And access, what that actually means, is a fraught and very live issue. When I took my children to concert halls to watch classical music being performed, they didn't see black people in the orchestras or as soloists. They didn't see black people in the audiences, and they saw a minority of young people. Classical music itself is not inherently elitist, but there is a debate to be had about what is allowed to be included in the canon and in the state music curriculum. Who is being pushed out in the story of historical and contemporary composers and performers? Who gets access to the music conservatoires at age 18 onwards? We have a battle to wage on many sides. And I think to go back to what you were saying about a formative moment, I mean, with myself and my children, their formative moment, well, a lot happened in their school. They were very lucky. They went to a school which was very keen on music. But I think for them, it was the moment. My older three children played in the inaugural concert for Chineke Orchestra at the Queen Elizabeth Hall in 2015. And that's an orchestra for majority black and ethnically diverse musicians. And I remember that moment so well because this orchestra came out on stage, majority black musicians. The audience was, suddenly there were lots of black people in the audience and young people. And me and my husband sat there in the audience, watched all these performers coming out on stage, and everyone in that audience stood up. There was a standing ovation before anyone played. And I remember Stuart, my husband, and I just crying, and lots of people around us crying. And I think for us, that was an incredibly formative moment. So.
Thank you for sharing, Kadi. That's so inspiring to hear and wonderful. Thank you so much to the students for asking questions. I will now invite Philip to share his formative moment and or his statement.
I think there've been lots of formative moments, and to pick one is a bit of a challenge at the minute. But touching on Kadi's comments about Chineke Orchestra being formed and being present on that occasion is one of those moments. I think also another moment was being invited to have a work played in Carnegie Hall. And when somebody asked me for this score, I just thought they were joking, and we'd have a long lead-in time to talk about this and to philosophize about it. And lo and behold, I just happened to look at something online and I saw my name in the program, and the fact that I hadn't sent the score gave me a huge probe to do something about it and get it to this particular artistic director. But it leads me to think about some of the key things that I think are important to music education. And that is that I think every child should have access to music education, particularly in a world where music is fighting to exist in our national cultural life, as well as being on the curriculum in schools, as well as being funded within higher education. And when people are making music together, they're thinking about harmonious things, they're thinking about positive things mostly, and through the process of creativity, much is accomplished. And I think about a time when music education was free, in the sense that you could have peripatetic music lessons free, the instrument was provided, you could have workshops coming into schools, artists in residence coming into schools, just as we've seen in this brilliant project that we're talking about today. And lots of young people were inspired to take up music because they could actually see the musicians in the hall, they could hear the sounds, they were being invited by the musicians to touch and feel the instruments and to even make sound with the instruments. Whereas now everything costs something and the music teacher has to diversify their skills to being a business manager, to actually delivering a curriculum and so many other things. And a project like this would be something they would have to fundraise for. I think about the curriculum and the kind of Eurocentric focus of it, with smatterings of world music, popular music, and other things added for GCSE music. It's better than what it was like when I was teaching O-level and A-level music back in that time frame when it was really, really rigid. And it's probably a good time to really think about how we can extend the curriculum so that so many children can feel they belong when we talk about music education, and when we do something practical, that they feel that there's something there that they can express that's part of them. And I recall a time when I went to Indiana Bloomington University Music Department, and I went to the African American archive of culture, and they had there a brilliant curation of classical music by Black composers, Motown, gospel, blues, you name it. And this was curated as well for exhibitions in the main music library, so that everybody could see what was on offer from these minority cultures that people wouldn't hear performed regularly. And this also informed the subsections of the department. So you had a Latin department, African American department, gospel, jazz, blues, as well as classical music. There was an opera house. The day when I went there, I heard an artist in residence delivering some Nigerian art songs for choir out in the quadrangle. And this is a university that prioritizes working with everybody and developing a an international community where all musics are valued. And I think for me, it was an eye-opener to see all these things happening in their curriculum and manifest in so many different students from around the world, and hearing the concerts at different points in the day. And I think, to conclude, I think it's great to see so many mentoring opportunities opening up. I've seen some in America and some happening here in the UK, which open the door to providing support for preparation for auditions to get into orchestras. The BBC are opening up new opportunities for broadcasting, developing the proms, and so many things. And I think it's this breadth of thought and reflection that could do a lot to reposition the place that music education is finding itself in at this point in time.
Thank you so much, Philip. I'm aware that we have some attendees in the audience that might like to engage with the panelists. So we have something that's come through in the chat just now from Alexander, and I wonder if, thinking that some of the attendees might have to leave for Alexander, whether you wanted to speak to this or pose anything to the panel.
I think Alexander's not a panelist, so he can't actually come on screen, but so we have to read him.
Yep, so it's this has been a very fertile conversation. Congratulations to Drs. Bullivant and Dieckmann and everyone else involved. This left me with even more questions than I already had. Classical music in Black Britain is a very different story to that in Black America, and that relates to the fact that Black identity in the UK is not the same as Black identity in the US, and beyond the issues that obtain to race and ethnicity. The issues of class are unbelievably badly understood and articulated, and the Sewell report has not helped. However, this single project has covered an insane amount of ground, and I'm inspired. Thank you so much, Alexander, for your comment. Perhaps I can bring in Roz at this point to speak to the takeaways for you in terms of music education, and maybe you can integrate a moment that Chloe asked about. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be as fast as possible. Actually, my kind of childhood, I was lucky. My mum was a pianist and learned the piano and organ and went to the Royal College on a scholarship. All of her education was on scholarship. My dad is a pipe organ builder, and we actually were, very, very poor when we were younger. My dad was an apprentice and he was on a very low salary, and my mum wasn't working. So I was very lucky. I had the opportunity to learn piano with my mum, and her best friend taught me piano, and my mum taught her daughter violin. So we piano. So we did I learned violin with her best friend. You know what I'm saying. But it was a swap. It was a skills swap, and we would not have been able to afford private tuition if I hadn't been in that situation. And I think that brings me on to something quite important about a few takeaways that through my work with music masters, and also working with schools outside of that as well, in kind of creating an environment which nurtures a love for music in all children, is a few ingredients involve, I suppose, being able to see barriers that are quite hard to see at times, and really understanding that the smallest barrier to access or to engagement with music may be huge for a young person, and it's really worth breaking it down and thinking and getting other people to think and getting other people's insight, because you can't know everything, and we all have our own biases that are very difficult to see past at times. So really taking the time to do that. Role models, we've talked about it quite a lot already today, but having role models where young people can relate and they can think, that's for me. We actually have one of our graduates from our programme who is now 18, I think, and she was featured in a Guardian article last year to say that throughout her junior conservatoire experience, she didn't feel in any way that she related, and she's not pursuing music further, although she'll keep it as a love, you know, in her life. So really giving those opportunities and bringing people in. And that also includes teachers. So teachers who come in, really young people being able to relate to them and what they can offer. And then I suppose the last thing I'm just going to say really quickly is actually providing long-term opportunities for young people. So the inspiration factor is brilliant. So having, you know, taking children to concerts and, you know, taking groups of school children to concerts, but actually providing then that opportunity for them to learn deeply and engage deeply and to have that space so that their voice is heard, their culture is heard, their background is heard and valued is so important, because otherwise, you know, it's almost worse, can't speak, than kind of not doing it at all. You have to create that space and develop those relationships. So that's, I'll stop now.
Thank you so much, Ros. A really rich answer and a lot of ideas in there. I love the idea of the skill exchange. Nate, maybe some final thoughts from yourself with respect to, you know, what you laid out in your statement and formative moment.
Sure. I think the statement's changed just based on the conversations that we've been having and the question about the formative moment. So what I would say is that I remember doing my undergrad degree and getting all the way to the end, and when the question came to doing dissertation and, you know, trying to figure out something to talk about, something to write about, the biggest thing you've ever written in your life at that point, right? And not knowing what to do. And long story short, I ended up writing about a type of music from Barbados, which is where part of my family's from. And I was essentially on my own because none of my lecturers had heard of this music before. I had never heard of this music before, right? This is me exploring, you know, my culture and you know, where I come from. So I was left alone to do that. And so essentially what I want to say is that I think it's important that we not only give access, but we support and we encourage. When we're talking about, you know, what it means to be British, right? As Emma said, it's understanding, you know, that we're all searching for our own identity and who we are, where we come from in different ways, right? I think music can be a powerful medium to help young people, no matter where they come from, to do that. And I think it's not just about, you know, giving access, because I think we have to ask the question, what are we giving access to, right? In my case, I had access going through, you know, doing all the grades, you know, playing clarinet in school, bass clarinet and clarinet in the university orchestra, etc. But then when it came to really finding out about who I was, there was no support for that. And so I think it's important. It's not just, like I said, not just about access, but access to what are we giving access to, you know, maybe some ideas of elitism? Are we giving access to, you know, harmful language that we still see in publications, in education and so on? Are we giving access to children who are going to have teachers who don't understand them, who don't see color, you know what I mean? Who don't understand cultural nuances and ideas of what different music can be and is for that child specifically? You know, is there a way that we can, in a sense, move from you know, just giving access to this kind of boxed idea of what music education is, and you know, to use I know we're in a classical space, but to use an album named by Joshua Redmond, Freedom in the Groove, right? How can we give freedom? How can we create a groove and give, you know, young people that freedom to explore within that framework, and giving them the support that they might need to explore whatever they need to explore at any given moment in time? Yeah.
Thank you, Nate, for that powerful statement to finish off and summarize and you know, some of the thoughts today. If my panelists will very generously agree to a couple of questions from our audience who stayed with us until past this point, I'd like to invite them to ask questions through the Q&A chat or the chat function. We have time for about 1 or 2 questions if any one of our remaining attendees would like to open it up. If nothing comes through, Yeah, via the Q&A box.
Yeah, sorry, I have a question, if I may, while we wait
Yep.
for people to have courage. So in our keynote from Laura Tunbridge on Monday, she quoted somebody who'd been involved with getting string quartets performing in working class northern industrial communities, saying that string quartets specifically was a taste of luxury. And I'm struck by what you were saying, Kadi, about the two-tier education system, where on the one hand, in private schools, music can be absolutely integral and very well funded, and then it's not available. And I just wondered if this idea resonated with the panel, that almost sort of classical music and the string quartet as a kind of example of that is almost seen as this sort of, it's like this exquisite luxury, and then there's a sort of it's a sort of almost self-fulfilling prophecy to say, maybe, well, do you want to have that luxury, or should you have that luxury? Should you have something bit more basic? Should this only be, as if this is a luxury, should it only be available to those who buy it alongside their champagne and other such things? So I just wanted your thoughts on that, because it sort of struck me as a revealing phrase.
If I may just interrupt, sorry, Joe, before, and Kadi, I think you might have just been about ready to answer. It's just that I believe Roz is going to need to go shortly. So Roz, if you want to say 30 seconds about this before you need to go, and thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. No, I'm happy to pass on to Kadi to answer this if she was about to. But I'm sorry I have to go. It's a childcare duties call. But it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for having me, and for this really wonderful conversation. And the project is just fantastic. So I may just slope off now, if that's okay.
Thank you so much for joining us, Roz.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
And sorry again for interrupting there, Kadi, if you want to take...
Well, I wanted to go on with what Nate was saying about what are we offering access to? What is this access? And I think it's so important to think about what classical music is and what is being taught, because it was a complete revelation to me when I was a few years ago to discover Samuel Coleridge Taylor, for example, whose father is Sierra Leonean and he's British. And for me, my father's Sierra Leonean as well. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is classical music. And yet we have people like this. And then, of course, it opened up a whole world of composers and performers who we have been made to forget about. And I think classical music isn't the thing that is necessarily being taught that it is. And I think that needs to open up. And I think also in terms of contemporary performers and composers, that needs to be opened up as well. And it's all about the definition of the music. And then, of course, if you have, I think what's being taught in private schools is very different often from what's being taught in state schools. And it's a bit like, I often think about the Jim Crow laws, that you have one kind of education for one and one for another. And I think what's happened in state schools is that music itself has been dumbed down. It's been made to be something that you only choose if you're not academic, if you're not serious. And that changes what is being offered. So what are you giving access to? So I think this is a conversation that could go on and on. But
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kadi, for that. And that actually leads really nicely into the final question that we have from an attendee, which is, I'd love to know how Black and ethnic minority musicians can make classical music as protest. Not at all saying it's impossible, but just wondering how this would be articulated. And that sort of leads really nicely out of your point, Kadi. So I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to start on that.
If I maybe just try and jump in, I think it's a really interesting question, and it's interesting when you say not at all saying it's possible, it's impossible. I think in some ways we do already. So I think Erilyn Wallen's arrangement of Jerusalem from last year's proms, I think, was one way of protesting, especially given what was happening at the time, right? And I think, just to be very brief, in different ways, I guess it's understanding what protest means Is it always, you know, in defiance of something, or is it sometimes is protesting something, incorporating something that you're already doing, right? So just knowing, you know, for example, Nas using a sample of Für Elise, Beethoven's Für Elise in his tune I Can, right? Is that a form of protest to say, you know, I'm making hip hop, but I can incorporate this in and make something great? KRS-One doing something similar as well, and others who have done it in the hip hop space. And you know, in the pop space, in the gospel space, you know, like we think of, you know, Quincy Jones's, you know, Handel's Messiah, for example. Is that potentially a form of protest? Say, hey, you know, we can not only understand this music, but we can do it too, and we can flip reverse it and remix it and make something which, you know, you never thought could be made with this music. So potentially that is a way of protesting in and of itself as well.
And also, I just wanted to mention Philip Herbert's amazing Requiem for Stephen Lawrence. I mean, that was a very classical string piece, but it was about something that was to do with our communities and our cultures, and something which we were protesting about. And that was a very classical piece and incredibly moving. And I think that's another example. There are lots of examples.
Thank you so much, Kadi. Maybe Philip, you want to respond?
I've just written a piece that's reflecting on the Windrush generation. And I guess it just crosses a lot of different musical ideas and traditions, but I borrow from something that's English in there. Yes, there are lots of ways in which people can express musical protest using musical vocabulary. And lots of composers have done it through the ages. Just thinking of another of Erin Wallen's pieces. I can't remember the title, but it's about the time when apartheid was at its height in South Africa. And she writes this piece for one voice. I don't know if everybody knows this piece, but it's a very powerful way of bringing about protest and using classical idiom as a form of protest.
Well, thank you so much for those examples. Joe, I don't know if you want to say any final words in response to our panelists who have provided us with such a rich and compelling and provocative, at times, conversation around these issues, bringing together your expertise from various different positions in this space. So thank you so much for that. Joe? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, just to echo that. I mean, we've been going for 2.25 hours, and it hasn't felt like it. It's felt like just sort of really energizing discussion, and I mean, actually, that was something I was thinking about yesterday. That through this week and the project as a whole, it feels like we've been dealing with very difficult issues and very searching issues, but there's also been I felt a real sense of joy, and this comes from the students as well, as they've discovered things, and from the audiences exploring this new music, both newly commissioned and newly performed music, and also repertoire that was unfamiliar. So thank you so much for all your contributions and your thoughts on, and I mean, I now feel also energized to keep taking this work forwards as well. So
absolutely. Thank you so much for the collaboration, and hopefully we can continue to work in this space together. And actually, Joe, that brings us to tonight's events. So this evening at 5:30, we have a second short quartet concert happening on the Torch channel at 5:30 p.m. And this is going to feature more of our student compositions are performed by the Villius Quartet, and we've been so impressed by the ones that we saw today. So it will be wonderful to see that played this evening. And then at 7 p.m, the quartet will be performing at the Jacqueline du Pré Music Building in Oxford. There will be premieres from Rob Fockens and Jasmine Kent-Rodman, and you can join that live stream to watch. So thank you very much to our attendees and again to our esteemed panelists, and we hope you can continue the conversation on the YouTube channel. Bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.